City Council is going to be meeting in a series of committee meetings. The first one, if you have an agenda, is Transportation Committee. We will not be having our Transportation Committee meeting tonight. Our committee chair is sick. We will go straight into the Communications Committee. The committee chair is Virginia Bishop. Member Bishop.
Thank you, President. Tonight we have kind of a large issue on our plate, which is an updated telephone and computer networking system for the city. And I'll just give you a brief background, and then I'm going to ask the mayor to really fill in all the gaps here. It's my understanding that the telephone system is about 16 years old, and I think the mayor will tell us why it probably needs to be replaced, along with the local area network system, which connects the buildings, and also maybe looking at the wide area network. Okay, with that, I think I'll turn it over to you to talk about what the specifics are here.
With regard to the computer network, we started this about 11 years ago. And at the beginning, we just had this building, and then we expanded to the law administration building. And it's really a data sharing of everything, but there's a cost involved with it. Our internet capacity goes through a high university. They have provided that to us. But when we started expanding out, there was cost because we had to buy something called a frame relay. We had to do DSLs to connect everything together. That system's probably been in place for about 9 years. In this summer, I think it was July, the carrier Verizon decided that business class DSL would no longer exist. And so when we tried to hook Arts West in, they wouldn't do it because there were no more DSL, and they didn't provide that service. So what's happened then in that for a while has been that we are existing by the secondary market of DSL modems. And when they've been taken out of other businesses in town, we've been able to acquire some of them, so we've had a few spare parts, and Ron has been capable to. We've had 2 of them fail so far, and we replaced those with the used DSLs we got from other businesses in town that have converted to another system. So we're at risk with the computer system, and this today, I mean, some months ago, or actually last summer also, we went to paperless purchase orders, for example. So everybody just does that over the local area network, and we aren't taking paperwork up to the auditor's office or waiting for it to be signed, et cetera. It's all done electronically. Excuse me, and many of those functions are. So we consider that an at-risk system. From the telephone standpoint, we have what's called a PBX system. They have them in museums now, I think. But again, that's when some years ago, Verizon decided to no longer service the PBX system. So we're again in the aftermarket for parts. And for service, we rely upon 2 distinguished gentlemen that are retired from GTE, or actually I think they were GTE, maybe, or Verizon, and so they've been able to keep us going. But again, it's a system that is at risk. So about 1.5 years ago, our technical people, Ron Forrest and Scott Thompson, started to look into how could we become more state-of-the-art and get systems that are supported and everything. And this has led us to a whole series of things. And I think I'll give you some papers so you can look at some numbers. And I'll try to walk you down through it. And Ron's in the control booth, so if I get in trouble, he'll come out and bail me out. Okay. The first thing that we did with this company was to hire them for, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000 to survey our system and to look at what we had, what types of things we were trying to accomplish with it, the whole gambit. And then they brought back to us things we really hadn't thought about a whole lot because we added to the system over time. We did it with our in-house electricians and our staff. And so they're saying our system wasn't too secure because, well, you can remember council office and how it looked back there with all those wires running around. And it was the same thing and a lot of others. Now, it looks a lot better today when we did do some work there to get it back together. But so their cost prices, as we look at things, would include those kinds of items, but they have looked at the system extensively. All of the prices that we have got are under state purchase prices. So no matter who does the service work for us, the equipment cost is going to stay the same. The first one up at the top is just the Verizon DSL and Verizon Centric is what we have today, to give you where we are. We've already expended all the capital costs we can, so that's there, and it costs us about $4,500 per month with the carrier to provide us the DSLs and the frame relay. Now, of course, when Verizon went out of that business, they brought in a new business just for commercial customers, which they're willing to switch us over, and you can see the capacity goes up quite a bit. And it is a T1 connection, but capital cost to put that in would be about $60,000, and it would cost us $11,500 a month to be into that system. That cost would go on forever, and what we have is, again, well, until the next price increase, let me put that another way.
Rick,
Yes.
is that one of the systems that's actually kind of obsolete right now? Or, I mean, it sounds like it's the next step over, but how old is that? Do you know?
I don't know. Duran, do you know how old that
That
is?
system's about 3 or 4 years old right now,
So it should be good for 3 or 4 more, isn't it?
until they make a change or it sells to different companies.
Okay,
You'll have to tell.
just wondered.
Hey, Ron, good for a microphone.
Yes, the sit And then we took a look at, and by the way, we did also contact like Time Warner and asked them, like, if we would hook the city building into this. They're saying about $5,000 a month to do that. So it's up there too. And that would not do the local area network. It would just do the city building and law administration building. We'd still have the other problem. The next option, and this is a basic option, would be to put and build our own radio frequency point-to-point network. It would be dedicated just to the city. It would be a secure network. It's really like our communications system that we have for public service, police, and fire right now. We would find what towers that we currently own or have the right to be on, and we would do a radio Wi-Fi type system to be up. That capital cost would also increase the speed quite a bit to that on all of these. It would be up to 54 megabits per second? Megabits.
I'm
Gotta
sorry.
remember the
Can I-
abbreviations.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
This deals with the computer network, not the
Right.
phone,
And then
right?
I'll start adding the phones in the next line.
Okay, perfect, okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm,
I think it's the next line, yes.
okay.
And that would be $243,000 capital expenditure. It would then have a $1,500 a month maintenance. Now that is negotiable because it depends upon, do you want 4-hour maintenance return? That's the Cadillac that they would offer, or do you want 24-hour or business time only, et cetera. So you can negotiate with that one. And then the carrier costs, because there still are items that would be there, would be about $3,500 per month. Now, when you run all the cables to reconfigure all the points in the local area network, in that same cables that you run through, you could then run the telephone cable to set up your own telephone system. What we would do there, and the major difference is, right now, everybody has their own telephone line on their desk. and you have to call that number, et cetera. We have to then purchase voicemail in blocks for certain areas, et cetera. But to give you an idea, I think that with our fax and everything else, we have about 105 telephone lines within the city. And each one of those costs a business rate for each one of them. What this system would do would be run on a Cisco router, is what they recommend. All calls would come into the router. They would then be dispersed to whichever phone you've told the router that day you're going to be at. If it's for you, for that number, because your numbers are portable. We keep the same phone numbers that we had under the Verizon system. We'd still be under Verizon because we would have, they're estimating right now, somewhere between 24 and 30 telephone lines coming into the city we'd still have to pay for. So we would have a savings of 75 or minimum they're looking at in phone lines to help recoup that cost. They won't pay for it 100%, but it is at least some cost reduction. And that would be, in the capital cost there would be purchasing all new phones, because they're different than the PBX type style that we're under right now. We would also dedicate some of those, otherwise they wouldn't come in and be rerouted. For the police dispatching, we would say, oh, we need 2 or 3 that are always hooked up to only the police department, the communications center. And then if we started to get delays, because we get a report out of the system, if there are times that people, we need another line, in other words, coming into the city, we could always add to or adjust downward if that was necessary. That has a capital cost of $412,000, and this is not an additional, this is just a brand new total. And it would have maintenance costs, because you still have about $2,000, because you've got your base $1,500 and you're going to have some more with this extra equipment. And then your carrier cost would be $3,500, and that was what was carrying forward from the last one because I didn't have a phone system in there yet. Then you can go and go a little bit further and do this is a voice internet protocol.
Yeah, this is a voice over IP, which a lot of people have with Time Warner now at home. It's a common technology now. So.
Is that used for, I mean, the voice over IP? Is that
That eliminates
instead of a
long
phone
distance
system? Oh, it eliminates long distance.
in
Oh.
the United States.
Oh, like it's a
and,
Skype thing.
Canada
Okay.
and I think so.
Did you say that was with Time Warner rather than Verizon at that point?
No,
This would
Time
be-
Warner offers the same type.
Oh, it's the
of-
same type of
thing.
technology. Okay.
This would be our own. We would purchase it with this increased capital cost, gets the capital cost up to $502,000.
Right.
Maintenance goes up slightly to $2,500, and it actually brings down a little bit the carrier cost, because you're not paying that per line charge for long distance access. So you get a little bit of savings there. It goes down to $2,500.
Okay.
Then, if you want to go to completely state-of-the-art today, you would blanket the city from the standpoint of the Wi-Fi. That no matter where a police cruiser would be, they would be able to have a computer in the car and get directly on the Learn system, sit out there and write their reports and just transmit it back. Fire department could have it, public work, street department, water department, sewer. Everybody could have that, because you in essence would have that blanketed, citywide. And then you're up to $647,000 capital cost, $3,000 maintenance, and $2,500 for your carrier, because you're really not increasing your carrier costs at all here. It's maintenance of the additional repeater sites, and you're buying laptops for cars and your changer. But each one of these, as you step up from the first option of having your own system where it says control by city, yes, is an add-on. The first one, I think, is important because it's the phone system, which I think is also at risk. The others in there can all be used. I mean, the question there is, to pay for everything. It's because you have two different methodologies here. As I said, you're going to eliminate some costs from what you are now. Other costs will go up, but especially in your phone system, you have a decrease in cost. I checked remember last year we had accumulated a couple years worth of the inheritance tax. We were able to buy a $400,000 fire truck with cash, which saved us, carrying costs and everything. This last year, I think it was a little over $235,000 that was received, plus we have a balance of a couple $100,000 in the capital fund. But we'd have to look at, because this would be system-wide, is the proprietary funds of water and sewer primarily, because we know we fund the street department through our income tax mix and recreation through our income tax mix, but the water and sewer funds are independent, and we would have to do some calculation as to how much it would cost into those areas. You always have the option of spending general fund money for anything, but we have traditionally wanted the water and sewer to be self-sufficient.
Okay, questions? Yeah. Paul?
That's the fast one.
Right, right.
Okay,
Go ahead.
question, in terms of the high price option, the mobile, would this actually enable us to have, I know right now we have our reservoirs and our pumps on some kind of telemetry readings. Would that be able to be put into this system as well, or would
You
that,
could.
would it be worth doing?
It would be more money.
Oh, okay.
Because you then would have to put, that there. Now, another is a good point, Paul, because I have asked the utility department at CAR to get with our current carrier and give me a price for an update of that system, because right now it's taking about 10 minutes to go all the way through both water and sewer systems. You could put it on this frame, but you'd still need equipment at each water tower, each pump station, et cetera. That way we will get those costs for that here probably within the next month.
Okay.
We've already talked to the vendor.
So that, in one sense, we save some money from getting rid of the vendor, but the other sense, we'd have to be buying more equipment and hardware to put it
Well,
together.
if we upgrade our system, we're going to have to buy new hardware, because right now is a telephone line-based system.
Okay. The other question is, in terms of this 647,000, that's assuming everybody jumps in and buys laptops and does everything at once, or is that just for their initial startup?
That would be including to buy the laptops and such, is my understanding.
That's
So
the
we
way I
could-
understood it.
We could phase that in if necessary.
Oh, yes. I mean, this, actually, everything from about the fourth line on there, because if you do both phone and computer at 412, could phase in at any point on those. It can get a little more pricey just because they got a little mobilization cost, just like anything else. Prices may go up or down in this stuff.
Yeah.
So, and this is this firm's best estimate based upon the surveys they've done, discussions they've had with Ron and I and Scott, and Captain Pyle, I think, was involved in those, because he brought up what about the police cars having, I mean, the base system would give it some places in the city, because there is still, there's a coverage area here we're talking about. But just like our communication system, wouldn't give it everywhere until you went to the extra steps of getting some things at other repeater stations, et cetera.
Yeah, it was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the one up from the bottom, 502,000, was that the first one that said that it would allow wireless connection to the, like police cars or something? Was that the option, the first option that would do that? Do you remember?
No, I think
I
that
think it's the last one.
either the 243 or 412 would give some of it, but there would be, what we would have to have the vendors do, the engineers, quite honestly, is come in and do a study of saying, okay, if we put this equipment that they've got in the capital cost at these locations, what will be your coverage area?
Yeah, because I thought these little, these cute little stoplights over here
Yes.
had, he had some, I did sit through this presentation, and actually, it was very interesting and very complex, but I think that the group explained it really well. Yeah, it was my understanding that it was only the last two options that would allow us wireless with the computers in the cars.
The last option will allow it completely.
Right, right.
As long as they install the radio frequency antennas point to point, it has that ability, but the last one is the price with all the equipment included
Right.
to be able to do that.
Right. And the second to the last one kind of sets us up to be able to do it, I think, doesn't it?
That's the radio system
Yeah.
and the new phone system.
Right. Any questions from folks? Paul?
Okay, so this would improve our telephone system, our computer system, and I assume our web presence and all that other stuff, I assume?
The new upgrade to the network will clear up a lot of issues that we have with congestion, security. It will make a difference. Productivity among the offices, it'll be a faster connection for them. They'll be able to push data in and out faster as they start to use more web-based applications like the rec center. Everything's online for them right now. Andy Stone has or is real close to doing the fleet management over the internet, so
Yeah.
that'll clear some things up for him too.
Yeah, it's my understanding it doesn't affect our server situation, right? That was your
Yeah, I
question.
think that's the question I had.
It does not, and but I had asked you if you would look into what that would mean while we're looking at these things.
Right, and I think that's one of the options, Virginia, that we looked at was, rather than using the universities, we could go with Time Warner.
Mhm.
They want $5,000 a month. But that would give us a different link, just like you have at home, bandwidth-wise and everything else, to be then our conduit to the wide area network of the internet and everything, and people getting into us on the others. We're going to continue to look at Ornet and a couple other providers, but just, for the purpose tonight, we made some phone calls this afternoon and
Yeah.
got the Time Warner warrant rough cost, just to
Right,
help give an
right.
idea toward that.
Yeah. Paul?
In terms of how much, I know we used to have cameras in the police cars. We don't have them now, I don't think, right? Or do we still have them?
We have, I don't know if we have any working right now or not.
Okay,
That's
and what about
one-
laptops, I guess the next question.
We had some laptops in cars, but they had to come back to the parking lot here because we have a network in here that's wireless.
But now, anyway, we're out there.
Right, they had to.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the idea is if they could, I know when we were discussing this, if they could perform some functions from their police cars rather than driving in or something, there would be some efficiencies there, and checking license plates and things like that on the road. Is
Well,
that
they would
right?
be relying upon the dispatcher then to input that data, wait till they get it back, then relay it to them, and meanwhile, they got other calls, et cetera, so it would all be done directly from them, from the squad car, so it's some efficiency.
Yeah, so it's something to consider in terms of which option. Yeah, Jim?
Of these last two, maybe these last three, what Ron has talked about, what the mayor has talked about, obviously, our usage of the system is growing rapidly. It's grown tremendously in the last few years. We can anticipate that it'll get more and more complex. Do all of these have extra capacity for our growth included? Or do any of them?
With the the wireless connections for the buildings, that sets us up to add the additional services on top of those. It's like the backbone that we have to build that, and then we can add a phone system to it. We can add the ability to have radios or laptops in police cars, but the backbone is the most important part.
So anticipating that we will have growth in this area, this latter one is probably a good investment.
Yeah, which one are we looking at? The last?
The high price one.
The last one, the bottom one.
Right, and with all the point-to-point radio transmissions, if we find that there's a need for more bandwidth between a particular building and back, we can exchange those particular units to have a more bandwidth and faster transmission too, so it's completely modular in that sense for both.
Or if we add another building at some point, we can add that building to the system It just requires the radio.
If we had
set.
10 buildings,
You can have 10 buildings, have 20 buildings, we can take away buildings.
thank you.
Oh, Debbie?
I'm going to go back to the question that Paul raised. So either any of these connections are still going through OU for the main connection to?
That's my understanding.
Yes.
To the outside world.
Unless we basically suggest that we add that into this, because I know that I have trouble getting on the website. And it's my understanding that if the OU server is busy, which it often is, then that interferes with our access to our website. So that's why I've asked them to look into that. Yeah. Oh, are you finished?
Do you have more?
Debbie?
Okay, the reason why I was asking about the website capability, because I sat through Bajinka's presentations last Wednesday, was it Thursday?
Yes.
And one
yes.
thing I really you kept hearing was that the city needs a bigger web presence. But in terms of this, I guess the next question I would have is, I'm looking at the unappropriated balance of January 31st of '07 there. And the capital improvement says certified resources is 601,000. What is the cut, what would be the cut, you think, offhand, between the water and the sewer and the other departments?
Well, just the water and the sewer?
Well, whatever is proprietary is therefore that gets pays for itself. I mean, if we're just going to use capital for the general fund aspect of it, or, I don't know. I mean, I'm asking how you envision this to be.
I envisioned
Split.
it more that the capital fund would pay for that for the recreation center, the street department, code office, well, I'd say the general fund, and the general fund items, because they're all funded by income tax primarily.
Okay.
Other than, well, code does charge a bit and is closer to being self-sufficient than anything else in the general fund. And it would just be water and sewer that would, and if you're down to the basic phone system and everything else, we can do the count and get the split on that. And I think that 600 and some thousand at the end of last year, that is totally the cap, is without any transfer of that inheritance tax collected in '06. That's prior to that. So we still would have some degree of flexibility within our capital system, I would think, because part of this would also be, there would be some cost savings in the phone lines particularly. And the general fund is the biggest one to be the beneficiary of that.
Okay.
Any other questions or issues? Yes.
Well,
Carol?
what is our monthly charge at this point? Now? For
which?
For what,
I
you know,
don't have
what
a-
we currently do? What are we
Yeah.
currently
Oh, yeah, right.
paying for these services?
I think that's the $4,500. if I
Okay, that's
explained
what I wondered. Yeah.
What's in
Yeah.
there correctly.
Yeah, and it's my understanding, I don't know if we,
Now,
I've
whether
talked
that's a
about-
combination of phone lines and
Yeah.
the DSLs and the frame relay, I'd have to ask them.
We have to look.
yeah, I mean, it's my understanding, kind of get back to this, that there isn't any more support for our phone system
No.
or the,
We're just using private vendors.
right. So I guess the question at hand is, Communications Committee, do we want to ask the mayor to move forward with one of these and write an ordinance to that effect? Or do we want to talk more about what some of these options are? As I say, it's my understanding that the second to the last option allows us this mobile capability, but it doesn't actually implement it at this time for $502,000. It has everything in place to allow it, but we can't implement it because we don't have the rest of the equipment. And the last one is full-blown mobile equipment at this time. Yes.
Just another question concerning the technology and the rate of development. What's the usual life curve of new technology?
This is ISO 9001, or can't remember, this is 9000 series ISO. They guarantee the parts will be available for up to 10 years from the time we purchase it. So if we purchase the system and a radio goes bad, that radio will be available 10 years from this date.
Okay, so the equipment would be available, but how long would it be the Cadillac and the state-of-the-art, like
That's
6
hard to
months?
tell. I mean,
Right?
it's a lot faster than what we have now.
Right.
It's a whole lot faster.
Well, I understand that, I just am concerned about, that technology curve is so fast.
Yeah, the beauty of this is it is a modular system. So as there's radio transmitters that change, routers that change, those are just modules that can be taken in and out in small chunks.
Or if we do find a building that has a need for a higher connection speed, we can just change that building out and not affect the rest of the system. If they're idle and they're content with their speed, we can just upgrade a section at a time if we have to.
Yeah, and we're talking about internal communication, really, when you were talking about that, database, city employees accessing the database. So I guess my question, do we need more information, or do we want to proceed? Did you have a question?
One question.
Yeah.
Would this enable us to have government access television at a lot of other locations a lot easier by any chance?
Yeah,
I know the problems we've had in trying to be able to do things at the community center will.
We could broadcast over IP. It would require some additional equipment on our end, but the bandwidth would be there for that.
And is it my understanding that people are interested in adding in or a cost for better server access to the city's website?
I would like
I
to
am.
hear more about
Okay.
what it would cost, like looking
Okay.
at different providers in the area.
Okay,
We've only got one
right.
quote right now.
Yeah,
so,
if you could do that. Yeah.
I would also like to, and I thought of this as we were talking, because what we're getting is personal experience and complaints. And I wonder if it would be worthwhile on the home page to put a link so that people would see it and say, have you been having trouble getting to this? If so, how often, et cetera, so that we try, because we're getting how many thousands of hits?
We've got almost 1 million hits on our website since January. We had a total of 419,000 for the entire year last year.
Yeah. Who are these people? I am fascinated by, I mean, we only have,
Well,
I
we
mean.
kinda gotta survey
is
our
it-
customers is
well,
what I was
is it-
suggesting.
Is it city employees or something?
It's a combination of.
I mean, because I can't imagine there are that many I'm sorry, I love Athens,
It's
but,
unbelievable.
Well, wait a second.
Are we still streaming?
no.
No?
Not right now.
But I mean, the thing is that technically, to be able to, I know that we don't seem to have a lot, but I know I've had the problem, and Debbie's had the problem, that if we could just look into this, because, yeah. And I just want to add one more thing, I'm sorry, then I'm going to question. That during this presentation, and I don't think we have the visual now, also what this would solve, it is my understanding, is all of the random wires and, various cables that are in people's offices and hanging from the ceiling, et cetera, et cetera. And that was one of the major contributors to looking at upgrades to this system. Is that right? Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
Ron, when you talk about hits, are you talking hits per web page or for front page per?
Those are page loads. Every time
Page
a
loads.
Page loads, that's
Okay.
counted as one hit.
do you know the unique visitors?
18,537 unique visitors.
Okay.
What time period?
That is from January to present.
Okay, so 18,000 people accessed it hundreds of times each.
Well, yeah,
Maybe
I use it quite a bit.
maybe they were trying to get in.
I mean, if
Okay.
I'm looking for somebody's name or something. Okay, so I kind of lean towards the high price one. But is that just the baseline, the 647 is just to get it set up and know, or that's, as you say, it sounds like that's to give everybody computers immediately and go. But laptops, the mobile PS network.
I could, if that's, you want to, I mean, obviously, the company has done this from a list of things or they wouldn't do it. We could, if that's where the interest is, we could ask them to supply us within the next week with a list of the equipment and any more details that you might want to ask, so that we could have that available at first reading.
And my question is, do we have to bid this out? I mean, in other words, if the vendor were to say, here's what's included in my bid, would we then have to bid the rest? Would we have to bid this out as a contract when we want to go forward?
When we discussed this with the law director, and since we're using state purchase price on all the equipment and items, he said that we would not need to because it's an established relationship with a provider of services to us. We could bid it out if you want, but I think that part of the things would be repeated for what we've already done. And we only paid about $6,000 for the survey, so we
I
don't
know.
have a whole lot into the consultant because I think he wants to sell us the system for the,
Oh, of
not really
course.
the capital cost, because he ain't gonna get anything much because it's a state bid, but the long-term relationship for doing maintenance. And the research that staff did on this was we tried to find companies that can do both internet, computers, and telephone systems, and there aren't very many of them that we could find. That's not to say that something hasn't popped up since then or whatever.
So, Nancy?
How many laptops are we proposing to buy?
Well, that's what I said, I could get the detail, and then we can answer that question, because
But wouldn't we just set a policy that people who are at desks would have desktop and people who are traveling would have laptops?
could.
I mean, because otherwise you're going to be, things, laptops, what's the failure rate on those and drop rate and all the rest?
Right.
I mean, it's a difference between 100,000 maybe and 15,000.
Well, yeah, I think the idea was the police car, the people.
Yeah, but
police
then I was
and-
afraid
yeah.
it had gone to all
Exactly.
100. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh my goodness, that's way
So-
more laptops than we need.
Yeah.
So are we saying that we would like more detail on this, including the costs and options for better server access with the internet? Okay, more detail, and yes, Paul?
And the other thing is a breakdown of where the funds will come from. I mean, that will end up in finance personnel, I know, but just.
As soon as he gives me that equipment list, I can crank
Okay.
out the numbers or the other.
Okay, so next committee meeting then, 2 weeks from now?
Sure.
We'll have that? Okay, and then we can move forward. Okay, thank you very much, Ron, Mayor. Okay, and miscellaneous, I don't believe I have miscellaneous, so communications. Oh,
Business meeting thing?
announcements of what? Oh,
Business.
well, actually, this is for, I could announce this. Many students, as we all know, are working on, in classes at OU, at alternative plans for Halloween. And one class presented on Thursday and got very nice media coverage, and we thank you very much, Messenger and News. And the OU Business Cluster will be presenting their ideas, Walter Hall, this Wednesday, March 14th at 5:30. So media and those interested parties, Tourism Bureau, et cetera, city council people, I invite you to attend. Wednesday, March 14th, 5:30, Walter Hall. And I see that I have left the room number off this.
245, isn't it?
245.
It's something like that, because the students had an invitation from them.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you.
We'll find it anyway on Wednesday.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Debbie, do you have miscellaneous for communication? No? Okay, the Communication Committee is adjourned. Thank you.
Okay. I'm calling to order the Planning and Development Committee. We have the Summit at Coates Run before us. If you two want to come up and have a seat at the table so people can hear you when you talk.
Should we bring the easel up and just set it up in between the two tables? Or do we need the board?
Wherever a camera can get to it. I
Where the
imagine.
camera people want the easel would be. Okay.
Okay. So somebody's got to be at the podium, I guess.
Do you two have information that you want to present before we begin our discussion?
Chris Schroeds, Chief Architect with Edwards Companies. Not really. I think you guys have seen this project a lot. We just ask that you recommend us to council that we meet the following conditions: the shade tree planning, that we meet approval with them, that we have approval with the Disabilities Commission,
and the reviewing engineer.
Yeah. It's, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on engineering, and we have the answers we need to proceed. We hope that you can send us forward and let us prove that to you.
At our last committee meeting, there were a list of items that we needed to see before we were ready to move ahead. And one of them was that we get one set of plans instead of having the two different versions of the plans. So we did receive this. It was FedEx to us. It looks to me like there are a couple pages that still have the old site plan layout. And Ryan, would you want to look at these and verify?
There are. We didn't go in and revise the intent of the buffers and the landscaping and the lighting, the parking lot coverage.
So if we,
Because of the time involved in going in and figuring
Right.
all that out and changing it, you know, we want to establish our intent of a certain level of buffer that we are committing to, and we felt that no matter what the plan does, the little change in the building shape, we're still committed to that level.
okay. So on these particular plans that show the other layout, maybe we'd just write a note, you know, saying that, you know, obviously there have been slight changes to the plan layout, but that, just to be clear that there's one plan that's being approved.
And
If
that
we
should be
can-
written in, if you look in the first part, the statements of intent,
Mhm.
I included both of them from the initial submittal and the update packet. The update packet goes through and explains why we didn't revise all the documents and that we're committing to a certain level.
Is there something specific on there that,
I just,
on the
in looking
difference?
through, I was
Right.
just kind of looking to make sure we had one set of plans and that was clear what it is that we're considering as we bring this forward. We also wanted to have the review by the Disabilities Commission and the Tree Commission and get a copy of the letter from Burgess and Nyepel. And was there something else on that list of things that we needed? Just, so I think we got part of the response from the law director, which I did not print out for everyone. It was the question about Title 27, and what he indicated to me in an email is that it is just in the purpose language. So you know, it does need more in there if we're going to be able to fully implement it. So that was the general sense of the law director's view on that, the land development ordinance.
What needs to be changed on it then?
That the reference to the size and shape of the topography is only in the purpose language in the title.
So we need to change that eventually.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what, could you elaborate on that a
Yeah,
little
what
bit?
is that? Yes, please.
The land development ordinance, Title 27, is the one that has the statement about not substantially changing the size and shape of the topography. And the law director indicated that that's really only in the purpose statement, and we need more, if we're going to be able to do much with that, we need to,
We as in council?
council
Council,
will
yeah.
need to go back and consider that at a later date.
You mean the code itself
Right.
is limited in its
Right.
Okay.
writing out
But they
of
have
what
to
the
follow
requirements are, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I did give everybody a copy of the letter from Burgess and Nyepel. The letter from the Tree Commission is included in this final plan, which I can pass around to people, or I don't know if you had a chance to review it when it was up in our office.
I can just state again that we're just asking to move on with, you know, the idea that we'll meet these conditions. Eventually, we have to. We wouldn't be able to build if we don't meet these conditions. And as we stated before, we're on such a tight schedule to meet an '08 opening in the fall, and we have a partner that we're committed to. We have to move forward with it.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, that's where we are.
I'm just updating council members on what we have.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't-
So, I also brought up an alternative plan application has been filed for this site, and I requested that we have this here for people to look at if you wanted to. I don't know if people had a chance to look at that. I think it would be really awkward to try to do that right now, but, Mayor Abel, do you, with two different proposals pending for the same piece of property, can those both be out there at the same time? Does that filing affect anything that we're doing here?
No, it doesn't, because if you remember, there was a previous submission by Mr. Dowdy, his corporate entity, which was at preliminary approval with the Planning Commission, and he opted to just table that one to produce the Edwards one. So you only have one recommendation from the Planning Commission.
Okay. I guess we'll keep this up here for a few days if people want to see it, and then I'm gonna need to get it back to Steve. So, I asked Debbie Walker to go ahead and draft a possible ordinance. And here are some for council members and some for Ryan and Chris. If you're able. There were some, there were some discussions, I had some individual telephone conversations to try to see if we could resolve some of the questions about the parcels that were kind of left for future possibilities. And there are a couple suggestions here with conditions that we add that would deal with those concerns. One is that parcel B, which has the B3 zoning, would just be removed from the planned unit development, and if the developer wanted to come back and subdivide that later and go through an approval process for something that fits that B3 zone, that would be a separate process, that we would be taking it out of this planned unit development. That parcel C would not be receiving that blanket approval for conditional uses in the underlying zone, but would remain as open space. That will, largely because the stormwater detention for the project is on part of parcel C. And in response to the questions about size of the project, the developer proposed that they were willing to remove the one building that's closest to Greenbrier, which Ryan's pointing to on the map, which would reduce it to a total of 794 bedrooms. And then you're suggesting this evening that we go ahead and add conditions about approval of the Tree Commission, approval of the Disabilities Commission, and approval by our consulting engineers, Burgess and Nyepel, that we add those as conditions in this ordinance.
Right. As we move forward or get some notion that there is some support, I think that process will be engaged at the same time. So that hopefully as we proceed through this process, we'll have more information each time.
And I did give everyone a copy of the letter from Burgess and Nyepel. There were some fairly significant issues raised in there, including the statement that the stormwater detention plans were conceptual and they needed to see hydraulic calculations, and some questions about some of the proposed cuts and whether they ought to occur at all. So they're not just, small concerns.
Yeah, and that one comment about the cut, it's actually dealing with this piece down here next to Richland Avenue. They didn't know that we were planning on doing some sort of retail there in the future. And that would be the answer to that one. The other outstanding item that I saw in Burgess and Nyepel letter is back here when it goes to dealing with this cut along the back property line. We need to provide a little shelf at the top of the cut, and then a shelf at the bottom for a fall zone. But we feel that we can tweak the plan enough to get that to work, where we would comply with their review.
I have a question. Could we clarify, like where we are? Okay, are we suggesting that the ordinance be rewritten to include compliance with these?
Yeah, so 3 more conditions.
3 more conditions in the ordinance.
Mhm.
And then what did I understand you to say? That,
Those are, I'm sorry, I don't even see those as conditions. We have to have those, right? I understand they're conditions, but we wouldn't be
in other
able
words,
to
you're
move forward
saying,
with that.
Our ordinance requires those to be filed with your final application,
I see.
so they aren't there now, and I think we need to make specific mention of them.
Or we can wait till they get filed.
okay.
We'd rather comply with them.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're suggesting those go in the ordinance, and then the developer would agree that that would be part of the agreement.
And those
Sorry.
conditions are, disability commission, tree commission, what was the third one?
Burgess and Knight.
Burgess
First and
and Nyepel.
Nyepel's review, okay.
And there are other, the service safety director has to sign off on the stormwater detention. There's a bunch of stuff that is a normal part of the process, and I think we're not spelling those out because that happens anyway. There's continuing review and involvement. We also will have to have a public hearing. Debbie Walker says we need 20 days' notice to the adjacent property owners. So the earliest possible Monday would be April 2nd. That would be bad. Okay. Maybe I counted wrong. You would do the 9th, which is a committee meeting night?
The ninth?
April 9th.
And the public hearing comes in the midst of readings or before we begin reading, or how's that? Does it make a difference?
It can go either way. I'd rather have it be introduced by the Planning and Development Committee and not by me as an individual. My committee members are okay with that.
Okay. I had a question or a comment. These gentlemen are correct that these are conditions that have to be met. It's our normal course of business that they would be met before we vote on an issue. And you're suggesting that they will be met, and we need to indicate to you how our feelings, our indication is the vote, which occurs at third reading. And I sense a reluctance to have third reading until we have more compliance with particularly those last three conditions that were enumerated. So I'm not sure what you're asking for.
Well,
An
to be honest,
indication
we'd
of
really
our
like to
support.
build the PUD.
I'm sorry, I didn't
We
hear.
would really like to build the PUD. We'd like to start quickly, because as I mentioned, our schedule kind of has us backed up, because it's taken us a long time to get through the process. So we've submitted the R3 just because of schedule. We have a partner that dictates the schedule of the construction, and we're bound to it, so.
I'm sorry, what is that schedule?
To open in '08, if we need 14 months of construction. It's just that if we drag on the PUD, I don't think we'll be able to pursue it, honestly. We've mentioned that the past several months that we need to move on it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I think what we're asking for is, yes, to move on through the council process with the PUD. I think the reluctancy is that the client has maybe some hard feelings over what happened at the council level with the development agreement.
And it's not just, it's not Edwards. I mean, we really do want to do this, but we have.
Going, and all of a sudden, he didn't show up to a meeting, and there wasn't any support at that one meeting. And so it's very risky for them to go out and continue down this path if they don't have any consensus or any basis to make decisions on to move forward. And so while we're pursuing this plan through the first, second, third reading in council, as we go through that process,
That
the plan
timeline
is
would dictate that we'd spend another $100,000 just to get there, and we still don't know.
engineering would have to be developed. Meeting with Shade Tree Commission would still continue on. I just, with the thought of having the plan possibly changing at council level, that's where they are.
Thank you.
I mean, I communicated by email with Mr. Kirk and said that I believed that the letter from Burgess and Nyepel, our consulting engineers, raised some very serious questions. And that I saw two possible ways to proceed, and that there may be others. One is that they could respond to those items and address the concerns that I believe members of council have, or we could go ahead and bring it up for a vote. And his response was that he would prefer that we go ahead and bring it up for a vote, and they would make assurances to address these issues later. So.
But what do you mean to address, I'm sorry, what do you mean to address them later? What does that mean?
That they have to get sign-off from our consulting engineers before they have
Anyway,
permits to go ahead. What I want to discuss as the miscellaneous item after this is how to prevent getting into this situation again. I really don't want incomplete applications coming to us. So,
As a member of the committee, I would say that given those two choices, then we could, I would suggest we proceed with the ordinance and go to a vote. In our regular course of readings, which is still going to be almost 6 weeks from now.
Can I ask a question on that particular point?
Can we ask you to get close to a microphone
Sorry.
so everybody can hear?
As far as continuing with the proceedings, can we do a first reading on the next council agenda and then have a public hearing and then move on to the third reading? Okay.
yes.
Thank
The
you.
second reading and then third reading.
So
The
after the
public
public
he-
hearing, you have to have a second reading after
Yes.
that? Okay.
Yeah, we have 3 readings at our regular council meetings, and the public hearing is a separate event.
Okay.
It's not a reading of the ordinance, it's an opportunity for people to speak to us. Bojinka?
so was Jim's suggestion to read this current one without the 3 additions that were added?
No.
No.
The
With
revised one.
The revised one with the 3 additional conditions added. Okay. Just checking.
I'm assuming that there may be other people who would like to speak to us about this. So you can, whoever wants to can come up to one of the microphones and can either come to the podium or the table.
I guess I can try the table. Uriel Grimm, 24 Canterbury. I'm not sure where to begin. First of all, at the meeting of the Planning Commission, where this was approved, the Executive Committee of the Southside Community Association suggested several other conditions that we felt should have been sent forward to you. They weren't addressed at all. And I'm wondering whether those shouldn't also be in here. One of them was, in fact, we didn't even say all of them. We had several that we didn't even bring up, but some of the things that we were talking about were bonding. You know, first of all, traffic bonding, traffic and road construction. Also, whether they're definitely bonding regarding runoff during construction, that we know is going to be a serious problem, whether they realize it or not. Let's see, then the sanitary sewer. What if there's a problem there? Shouldn't that be bonded? Yeah, the bond, as I said, with the runoff during construction, and then also resultant costs for dredging in the Hocking River after the sediment runoff. Let's see, emergency services. How's the city going to pay for the additional services required to the south side if we have 900 more, now 800 more residents? The The fire station is only open part-time now. It certainly can't stay open part-time with 800 more residents. So anyway, I just don't think this is ready at this point for consideration until some of these other issues have at least been discussed.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Lorraine?
Lorraine McCosker, 59 Elmwood. I think what I heard, I have a few concerns. Firstly, just the development itself and the fact that I thought last year, City Council, I don't understand this, did pass the ordinance where we would maintain the geography of our city, our hilltops. So that's planning to be removed with this. I have all the similar concerns that Muriel has presented, but also I think that we've run into these problems where the Planning Commission does approve these developments without everything in place. I mean, how can you plan to build this huge building on this hilltop without having done hydrology studies in an area where we have stormwater runoff? I heard that the retention pond will be considered an open or a green space. I mean, that's not an open space or a green space. You need, anyway. So I have concerns with that this would be voted on tonight before we actually know what kind of product you're getting. And I would not support that at all.
Anyone else?
My name is Ben Appleby, 174 2nd Street. I came to tonight's meeting for something else entirely, but I feel like I needed to say something because this is a pretty big project and has a lot of impact, either happening or not happening. Athens is a pretty old city, and we've got a lot of older houses, very energy inefficient. And I think this is a good opportunity, if this project were to go through, to have the developers bring us a greener project. I think part of that's almost impossible with the amount of dirt work that's needed, but something like the United States Green Building Council LEED standards would be a great start. And Chris, I'm sure you're familiar with those, being an architect. So if you could talk to us and the council about what sort of green features are going to be there, and if you're going to have any sort of national standards, or any way to actually gauge that greenness besides words, but we'd love to hear about that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Go ahead.
Good evening, my name is Jonathan Maffei, and I live on Canterbury Drive, 34 Canterbury Drive. And I've been following this project with interest. Obviously, I live in that part of town where we'll be greatly affected by this project. And I guess in my mind, I'm wondering just how, or just what criteria do we use here in Athens to decide if a project like this is in the best interest of the town or not? As I travel around Athens, I notice a lot of signs for rent. A lot of people who had rental properties are selling the rental properties because there don't seem to be enough people. There seem to be more units out there available for people to rent than people to rent them. And so we're facing what I perceive to be a glut in the community of excess housing for people. We have these units that people can't seem to rent, and yet we're going to invite these people to build this large, very large project in a very questionable manner where we're not even sure how it's going to impact the environment, as some of my colleagues and my friends on the south side have pointed out. Yet, on a more fundamental level, how do we even decide, how can we even achieve a criteria where is this the right for Athens in itself? Does Athens need another 783 units or 783 beds when we can't even fill up the beds we have now around town? So I'm afraid we're going to be left with a situation where there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of units uninhabited, unrented, and I don't think this project is going to help that. It's going to make that problem so much worse. And we already have a problem, and it's just going to make it so much worse. And that concerns me a lot.
Delia Rapp, President of the Southside Neighborhood Association. The only thing I really wanted to say is I'm rather disturbed about Gary's interpretation of the hillside ordinance, and part of the reason is I'm the person that read the two comprehensive plans to compare the environmental section. There's 4 parts to the environmental section. The plan that you passed is very passionate about trying to keep our vistas and hillsides, especially the hillside part. At the bottom of each of those 4 segments, the hillside section, the riparian zones, the telecommunications towers, and the vistas, view sheds, I believe, each one says need an ordinance. And the only ordinance that has gotten written was the hillside ordinance. And when you all passed that, and when it was written, I think we thought it would serve our needs. So I find that very disturbing.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to us? Okay. I guess I wonder about the LEED standards. It's not something, the energy efficiency, it's not something we'd ever really talked about. Do you have any information about, Edwards communities and if there are any energy efficiency standards that are met in the projects?
Other than we meet all national codes, which are always becoming more and more strict. Compared to older structures, it would be very energy efficient, other than there's nothing specific that we work to other than just the national codes and local codes.
Okay. I have to say that I share a lot of the same concerns that I'm hearing from citizens. I think that it was council's intention when we amended the purpose of Title 27 to protect the general feeling of and the way the community looks and feels, and after hearing from a lot of citizens in the comprehensive planning process that there's a really high value on the community that we have here. We like living in the hills. We like the beautiful, views that we have here in Athens. And so, I share that concern and I believe that we're going to have to come back and address that to make it work the way we intended. Carol?
I might add that the county land use plan is going through the exact same discussion at this point and emphasizing exactly the same thing, the hillsides, the vistas, and the need to protect those things countywide. So I don't think in any way that it was an accident that those things were in our comprehensive plan. It's definitely the feeling of the people who live in this area.
Paul?
I sat through some of these discussions about topography, maintaining slopes and hillsides, and it got pretty detailed. We drew little pictures of how hillsides should look. We talked about 5% of the hillside, changing so much percentage of the slope, the actual, I forget what it is called, the integration of the slope in terms of where it curves one way or the other. We really decided we were trying to be too constraining. We thought that if you made it way too tight, we'd have to go with all these exceptions and variations all the time. We assumed that the intent would be obvious and the vision would be obvious, that we'd be trying to maintain our hillsides and our viewscapes and not just take off the top of a hill. And that's really, from my point of view, why we gave it a little bit of blunter edge, because we thought that we didn't want it to thing where it ended up at the zoning board of appeals every time somebody wanted to, put put a driveway in or do something, you know? So, obviously it needs to be tightened up a lot.
Yeah.
Almost, unfortunately too hard, but it sounds like that's what we need to do, don't we?
Now, Debbie's going to have to figure out how to get those little sketches into the code when we incorporate them. So we will have to come back to that, I think. And we do have the notes that committee produced. And I think when we had that in front of us, people felt it was too detailed for the code. And I think we're seeing that we do need to dig into that deeper. So.
Chris back there.
Oh, Chris.
I thought I could stay quiet. But I would just urge any one of you on any one morning, if you want to talk about vistas and view sheds and the scope of this project and the size of it, to approach Richland Avenue, approach Athens on Richland Avenue, and take a look at what we have on the south side already with an 800-bed unit in University Courtyard. I know the design is not the same, but the scope of it and the size of it is, and see what it's done to one of the last hillsides that we have. And do we want that to happen to yet the last one, or one of the last remaining ones? Thank you.
Even with all of these questions remaining, we are being asked to bring this forward so that we can vote one way or the other, and they can know how things are going to go here. And if the developer isn't willing to do the hydraulic calculations and the expensive engineering work that Burgess and Nipel says is required before we vote, I don't think we're going to have the information. If we just decide to wait for that, I don't think we're going to get it. So my inclination is to go ahead and bring it up for a vote. Start it into the process. Set.
I'm not part of the committee.
However, as just a council member, we can have discussions and express our concerns and our views, but council's support or council's opinion on a matter is delivered with the vote. And the only way we can do that is to put up an ordinance, have 3 readings, have discussions at each reading, gather more information from the developer, and come to a vote.
We'll have this up for first reading. I have one miscellaneous item. I don't know if people have others, but mine is, there is a list in the code of the things that are supposed to be included in a final plan application. And it was in the chamber's scope of work in their contract to work with Steve Pearson and a committee of interested citizens to develop kind of a flow chart and a checklist for the planning process so that citizens and developers and everyone would understand the different steps and the things that are required. There have been some drafts that floated around at some chamber meetings. We haven't really gotten anything back. I would like to pass a resolution at our next meeting requesting that no final plan applications be forwarded to the Planning Commission until they're complete, that we develop a checklist of the things that are required in our code, and that plans not be submitted for final approval until all of the required documents are there.
At least submitted to council, you mean, right?
Right, from the planning commission.
From the planning commission.
To council.
To council.
Well, I mean, but the application is made, and then it's given to the planning commission, and then they make a recommendation to us. It seems to me that the point where the application is made, there should be a checklist that says, yes, this is complete, with all of the things that are required, and somebody looks to see if each one is there. The Disabilities Commission and the Tree Commission are supposed to be part of the final application. They're not something that happens sometime later if people get around to doing it.
In other words, what you're saying is no final plat approval till all the information's in. Is that what you're saying?
I would like a checklist and that people affirmatively say all the different things that are required are there.
Okay.
This
Bojinka?
probably follows up on Nancy's. In other words, it's the resolution that council would not consider anything, and it's up, but we can't make a resolution for the planning commission, right?
It would be requesting that our the administrator actually review the plans and go through a checklist and assure that they're complete before they're forwarded.
Oh, a city employee, you mean? Okay, before they go to the
Which would apply to
planning
future
commission.
things, not anything that's
Okay.
currently in process.
Okay, so before they go to the planning commission.
Or before they come to us. I don't care where it happens in the
Okay.
process. I would
She's
just like to
looking-
know that we have everything.
Okay.
Ryan Pearson wants
Okay.
to speak to this.
Since it doesn't apply to
From-
him.
Well, from the developer standpoint, or anybody coming forward with plans, if you have a PUD and you had a step earlier in the process where council actually reviewed the bulk of the matter, and maybe, I don't know if you need to take action or not, but at least weigh in so that if any plan changes need to happen, they would happen earlier in the process before it started going down, let's say, a wrong path. That'd be my only suggestion.
This might have happened a couple of years ago, for all I know.
Through the process? Because I don't think there's any point where we
Actually, I had a
had
vote.
meeting.
No, I know.
Meeting with council.
Hey, Ryan, if we're not talking about your development, though, how come you have the attitude that somehow there's only one set of plans and we don't get to keep them for more than 2 days? When, you know, in the past, I mean, this is just kind of my aggravation coming out, but it seems to me that both of you guys exude this attitude that we're unreasonable, we're a barrier. I haven't said anything for the reasons that you know. But I think, I don't know where you got that idea, but beyond that, what I don't understand is why we don't have a set of plans that are complete on our desk when we start hearing about it the first time. I mean, it's pretty unprecedented. Well, I mean, it's been of late more frequent, but in the past, we always had sets of plans. We even had to find a place to store them. Now we don't see it. I mean, and they're not professional. And, you know, it's frustrating for me personally to, in this case, it's especially frustrating, but that's a whole other story. It's frustrating for me personally to look at plans that that don't have all the parts. The last University Courtyard was not bad. It didn't end up great. But there have been other ones where it's just been a shambles. And, you know, anybody with a sense of pride, any developer should have a good set of plans for us, a good set of plans maybe even in the library in a development of this magnitude. I mean, because you'd like the people to buy in, wouldn't you? I mean, is that what this is
I
about?
have to apologize, but I asked if I should make 7 books or 1 book last time.
Well, you know, I mean, at this point, you should think, well, what am I doing? Am I trying to save paper, which I'm always for, but am I trying to save paper? Am I trying to get this thing done?
I'm not sitting up right now to defend any of this stuff.
No,
I just wanted to point out what I thought might help with going through the process and helping open up those lines of communication between the two.
Well, it's just a little frustrating for me to say, you know, like, now we have to give it back 2 days later. I mean, what's the deal here?
So, back to the miscellaneous item, do people like the idea of requesting that there be a checklist, assuring that the plans are complete, at least before they come to us?
Before they come to
Yes,
us.
yes.
And that we have a full set of plans that sit on the table that are complete.
So I'll draft a resolution, and hopefully we can do that next week also. Does anyone else have miscellaneous items for planning and development?
No.
Thank you.
We have a Finance and Personnel Committee, and actually, Member Weil of the committee has a couple issues he wants to bring up.
Okay. Essentially, there's two. Just pass that through. One is I got an email, I think some of you did at least as well, from Melissa Knight concerning our paint program. We have a house painting program that's been going on for a couple of years. We need to fund it. I think the discussion we had last week was possibly, in periphery, was the idea of actually putting about $15,000 into that. The other section of that was, okay, so it would come out of, if I understand correctly, and the mayor correct me if I'm wrong, it would come out of the Athens City Enhancement Fund, $250. And the idea is just to put it in there so we can have it for anybody who wants to apply for it. That would have to come up with an ordinance, and if I'm looking at the statement here from the January 31st one, we have the money in certified resources. Is that the case? Although we appropriated only $60,000 for the year, if I understand correctly. Is that it? Okay. The other, so how does the committee feel about that? That's you?
I'm
You?
on this committee.
You are on this committee, and
Yes,
Jim
I
is
am.
as well. Jim's head of it.
Right, I know.
Okay.
Um,
We've-
43,000.
Well, okay, we've got essentially two different things. I put,
Right.
bunched both of them up together.
Okay.
Essentially, there's a paint program and the estimates for the West State Street
Right.
Cemetery, which
Okay.
is the next item on our
Right, okay,
agenda.
that's what I thought.
I just was crunching them together.
Yeah, so
Saving
where's-
paper.
Well, yes, I guess.
That's right. So
Cutting and
where's the
pasting
paint?
more.
So how much is the paint?
Paint program would be about 15,000. I think we've put in between 10 and 15 over the years.
Okay.
I forget what it's
Oh, I
varied
see,
back and
yeah.
forth, I think.
And that's
Hasn't
for
it? Do you
painting,
remember?
low income, et cetera.
Different years, we will have different requests. And it depends a lot upon the age of the house, because some of these houses are really big. But most of the requests come from usually single-family moms, is the majority of it, because they have they don't have a whole lot of income.
Right.
And with the dependents, they qualify fairly easily.
Yeah.
I support the paint.
But
program.
right now, I only have one request from someone to do it, but whether this will generate 2 or 3, so I just ask for a maximum you want to spend. If I
Okay.
can do 3, 4, or if I only get 2 applications,
Okay.
that's so be it. But do you want to allocate 15,000 for it?
Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. You're for it?
Yes, it's a worthwhile program, I think.
Oh, definitely on board with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And also, I think we did amend it a couple years ago to include some repair work that would be associated with painting, so that
Yeah.
if the
Prep
gutter
work.
need, yeah, some
Right.
prep work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of this is cut down a little bit with the CHIS program that we have, because we have about 12 general home repairs in it, along with the down payment assistance grants, so. There's more impact than just the one painting program that's coming through the program.
If I recall, when you brought up the CHIS thing, if I remember, didn't Doug Stanley say that has to be cycled through more often, or is that the case? I thought it was changing for us, or Melissa said that.
Cycled through.
In other words, it had to be updated more often, or was that? No?
I'm not
Okay.
understanding the question. so-
Okay, I thought it was good for 5 years, I think.
Oh, okay.
And I thought one of them said sometime in last year that it was going to, the timeline was going to change, possibly.
I haven't seen any change on
Okay.
the timeline, but if you're just doing the repair, yes, it is a definitive time for loan forgiveness.
Okay.
That if you sell the property in, X number of years, and you haven't, say it's 5, and you do sell it in year 3, you have to pay the city back out of the proceeds of the sale for 3 years of that.
Okay.
It's the same thing with our paint program, it's just never happened. Only we have a 3-year timeline on painting, I think.
Okay. Okay, so that would be an ordinance to put in? You're looking like you're thoughtful there, Debbie. No? No, the other Debbie. Okay. Okay, so that can actually be put up. The other one is the West State Street Cemetery. That's all the next part of it. If you remember, we had a discussion about putting some new plaques up for those who weren't included in the wars, I guess, veterans. The other one would be replace the existing piers for the gates. I don't know about the replacement walls. I assume that first and west is the east alleyway on the east side of there.
Yes, as you're looking at it, would be on the west alleyway, I think.
The west one going towards
closer to
Arch West, then.
West.
Yeah, okay.
Because if you look there, the fence is on up 3 or 4 feet above where the alleyway
Mm-hmm.
is, and so an area gets created where people can get in through, or animals. The thought was to do a small retaining wall there as you go on down to First Street.
Okay, okay. I thought that was convenient for some people to sneak underneath, okay.
Well, it's probably that too.
Okay,
I think it's one of the concerns that you could have some, without a retaining wall there, you could eventually have more and more of the
Erosion,
ground
yeah.
sort of slip into the alleyway.
okay.
And that would tighten that up. And I think that when George made, he looked at what was the overall things that kind of need to be done from a a capital standpoint, the 500, monument headstone repair, that's something that's gonna happen every year for a long time. But the chain link fence, the plaques, the alley wall, and the four piers, the entry piers, those are all capital items that are, you do it one time and hopefully it's gonna last for a long, long time.
Okay.
And if you wanna spread that out over a couple of years, fine, or do it all. But there is always gonna be, people up there mowing and doing some monument repair. I haven't included any of the time of those folks to do it. But these prices, as I understand, would be to contract them out.
Okay, are you suggesting that we do parts of this or all of that?
Saying they're independent, so you could do it all if you wanted. The only things that are related together are the plaques and the
piers,
the piers, because that's where we mount the plaques.
Yeah.
So they're tied together, but other than that, each could be done independently if you want to spread it over a number of years, or you can do it all with the unencumbered balance, or unappropriated balance.
Which would take out a lot of the 60K we have.
Right.
I say appropriated.
Well, what's appropriated, though, is already going to pay property taxes of, what was it, $28,000-$30,000?
I think
And
you said
then
something about that, yeah.
There is a payment we do back to the school board.
Station Street, yeah.
On the buildings, because the other is just the land tax. And those two together are getting to the point where they're getting close and close to where we're getting in for it. So I've asked the law director to take a look at that to see if that was the wording of the intent, because as inflationary factors happen, in those, the city is getting less and less for the enhancement fund, and more goes to the school system, with either in the form of property taxes that we pay on the land, or the payment on the buildings in lieu of property taxes.
Okay, so we have a choice of doing it all or a little bit at a time. Go ahead.
I have a question concerning the plaques. Are you referring to grave markers or?
No, the plaques on the piers, on the gates, when you go in, there's a list of the people, veterans buried there.
Right.
There are some veterans that weren't put on the plaques. We need to add more plaques to add the missing people.
And have we spoken to the Veterans Associations about this? They usually will pick up the cost of that.
I know I've talked to George about going to them, but this is just the total cost. We could try to get a commitment. They did the flagpole there, it's been a few years ago. But I think that there would be some interest on that. I mean, each plaque itself costs, I think it's about $1,600 per plaque.
You got about 32.
Because it's that bronze type that we use.
Right.
And it's got
But
quite a
those
few names on it.
organizations are ordinarily looking for worthy projects, and this seems like it would certainly be in their purview.
Somewhere, Carl, somewhere along the line, we received a check for about $300 from some veterans organization from the west side.
Okay.
We had Cindy Johnson out there who was trying to get these plaques up and running, and she actually, we had this check show up at our mailbox at one point. So we know that's at least $300 that's going to go to the city at this point, because that's what it's dedicated for.
Right.
But, so I know somebody's been talking to him at least at that point.
Well, if some kind of proposal were put together to them,
Okay.
saying, we have these projects, would your organization be interested in participating? My guess is that you would have takers pretty fast.
Okay. So that would cut down on the cost. Go ahead,
And I was
Virginia.
just going to say, I think the plaques, and I like Carol's suggestion a lot. And I guess I wonder, given all the other expenses that we have, maybe leaving the wall for another year. I mean, it just seems like there's so many
Yeah. I could see the wall
water
holding off.
breaks and all kinds of things that need to be paid for, that maybe
Okay, so
do those things.
1,500, 4,007.
So it's like 20,800 unless we get money from the Veterans Association.
Yeah. So, okay, let's hold off on the wall for 1 year then?
Sure.
Okay, so we should put some money together for that then, an ordinance for that. And do you want to approach the veterans, or Or how do you want to do that? We can,
Sure, I can.
okay.
I've already booked in there, what is it, this?
Next Saturday night.
For the
Okay.
birthday function, I have to do a proclamation, so
Okay.
I'll be there anyway.
Okay, if I get a chance, I'll email.
88?
I'll email you whoever sent that. Again, we were puzzled, but I think we got information who sent us the check. Okay. So
Actually,
that-
I think it was the American Legion
Okay.
that was approached for that, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be approached again.
Yeah, yeah.
And there
It's
are
a-
other groups.
Other
Right.
veterans groups.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that covers both of mine. Any other miscellaneous? So your meeting's over then?
Okay.
Okay, Environment Committee. Basically, I have a recycling report from Lorraine Acosta. Do you want to come up and present? She was acting last year for the recycling. She was doing our recycling evaluation and study for what we were doing as a city. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to report on the recycling project or work that I did during the past year. I was working as recycling consultant to City Council, and I began last January by doing a solid waste inventory of students, streets, and neighborhoods during the winter of 2006. And this inventory was to establish solid waste patterns and problems, as well as to become familiar with the solid waste habits of specific streets. And if you look in your packet, it's the first sheet. The streets that I inventoried were West State to Congress, to Arts West, North and South Congress, North and South High Street, Mill Street, Kurtz, Palmer, Elliott, Stewart, and Hocking. And these streets were chosen because they're primarily student neighborhoods, and they have very few permanent residents. And I did a data collection. I had used a data sheet, and I looked at such things as whether they were utilizing trash cans with tops, without tops, the number of bags, trash can overflow, recycling, if they were sorting properly, if there was recycling contamination, which means whether the bin had products in there that were not recyclable, or whether they had a food product that made them unrecyclable, whether there was recycling in trash cans, and whether there was litter in the area. And what I found doing this, I spent probably 2 months walking on these streets on Monday mornings when the solid waste pickup occurred. And I found that most student rentals did not provide adequate solid waste receptacles with lids. Therefore, they were not in compliance with the solid waste ordinance. Because receptacles lacked lids on containers, there was litter in streets, sidewalks, and on properties. This also created a problem of overflow. Items protruded from the receptacles as well as out of the receptacles. Many students did recycle using bins, but others used bags, boxes, and other types of receptacles. The recycling problems were improper sorting and contamination in the recycled items. Sorting knowledge appeared to be limited with contamination and the use of green bottles. Many items that could have been recycled were thrown out. The trash contained items such as electronics and furniture. Solid waste problem areas could be seen in clusters, while compliance with the solid waste ordinance was also found in clusters. And what's important is the literature really supports that you create a social norm with regard to certain problems in a community or society. And this certainly applies to solid waste. So if we have a social norm to recycle or to not recycle, or a social norm to litter, then that's something that's it sort of stretches itself out into the neighborhood. Litter became a large problem in some areas, so large that it could be considered a public health hazard. Such areas were Mill, South, and North High, and parts of West State Street. Some streets were in better compliance than others. This included West State, Elliott, and Palmer. Dumpsters in specific areas were overflowing, lacking lids, and creating a public health hazard. Plastic bags were often piled with recyclables visible. There was concern that there were improper charges for these bags, and sometimes I would be on the street and I would notice that they were not getting charged, that the person who was driving would just go ahead and go forward without writing it down. I think a problem that there is, this is the tag that people can buy at City Hall for $1.50, and therefore they're not charged for those bags. If you do not have this on your bag, you're supposed to be charged $3. I think that this could be very difficult to see, and some people may be incorrectly charged. So apparently there's quite a few of these to be used, so that's why they're still using them. So one of my suggestions from this is that we have a block leader program, and I had talked about that last year, where we utilize volunteers from the community, and they act as a resource and an educator for other community members. Also that we offer recycling and composting education as well as solid waste information, that there be a recycling committee with students, perhaps awards for the cleanest streets, recycling houses of the month, tenant agreement to pick up trash twice weekly, education by landlords and enforcement of the solid waste ordinance, and incentives to landlords who do cooperate, and perhaps they could become more board members of the solid waste committee. And also that there was inappropriate storage and not enough recycling bins and trash cans. The city did buy 3,000 recycling bins in the summer, and they have, some of them have been distributed, and I'll talk about that more. Last year, I worked with the Community Assistant Program, which is out of the Office of Off-Campus Living in the Student Government Department at OU. And what they do is they employ 15 community assistants. Last year it was 12, this year it's 15 students, to be community advocates for other students and also as an interface between the university and the community. Last spring, I educated 12 students regarding solid waste, the solid waste ordinance and proper recycling in education, and those students were to take that back into the community. We continued this year by educating 15 of those students. They adopted an education pledge bin distribution plan, where we drew up a pledge, and students went out to the streets that they were responsible for and asked the students that they were working with whether they would take a pledge to recycle, and they signed pledges. They also took orders to distribute bins to those specific students who wanted it. Those bins did not go out in the fall quarter for various reasons. They did get distributed early in winter quarter. There was an article, it's in your package, for fall quarter I had an article about recycling in the newsletter. They have a newsletter every term, every quarter. So this one, you can see the front of it. When this is a copy, but the recycling article is actually on the second page, but you see some of the things that they talk about. Athens changed the noise ordinance. So they're trying to very gingerly teach students about community issues and to encourage them to be responsible in different capacities, and also just to be advocates. I did outreach in various venues. We distributed bins at City Hall the first week of fall term, and gave education, gave the green laminates and provided education. I also worked last year at the Athens Beautification Day, at Earth Day, and also various community assistant programs at Fall Quarter. These included a resource fair, a cookout, and one time they had something at Baker Center where the landlords were present. So that gave me an opportunity in code enforcement to talk to them. During this time, I had 3 newspaper articles. We did media outreach. One is about compost. I'll talk about that, but we did 2 articles to talk about recycling. I also did 3 radio shows with Studio B. One was with the Clean Committee, one was with Roger Bale, and then another was with a student representative. I did outreach to the Clean Committee, attended those meetings every month, and worked with them with regard to their concerns about the litter issues. I attended an Uptown Business Association meeting, attended monthly Athens Hocking Solid Waste Management District meetings, and interfaced with landlords and code enforcement. I also did outreach to different businesses to talk about their recycling problems and what would work best for them, and also just encourage them to recycle distributed bins. Also made up a green laminate that indicated that they were an Athens recycling business. I did a survey, pardon me.
How did they react to that? How did the businesses respond to
I
that?
think businesses really, and as we have more, how they reacted is mainly they were supportive. These were specifically businesses in the Uptown area.
Mm-hmm.
I think most businesses want to recycle. I think there are problems in the Uptown area because there's not the room to recycle, having their own recycling areas for different businesses. For instance, Red Brick would like to have their own bin area outside their back door. But you may or may not know, there's one area where people can take their recycling, which is the parking lot next to, I believe it's Lucky's. And that
GTA,
parking lot-
Cornwell's parking lot in the back.
No, it's the one before that.
Is it really? No.
Before, it's next to Attractions, I think.
Yeah, that's
that is.
that's actually, I think, is what we used to call the GTA. Isn't Cornwell's now? He owns that. It's metered parking, yes.
So, and I think some business owners do put their recycling out at night, but many are concerned with the litter issues and the fact that bottles may go flying and different problems. So I really think that many businesses do not get education when they first begin their business, and then ongoing. And I think that they could really utilize that. I also did a survey of the apartments in town who did recycling, and there are 3. I have the wrong names on your sheet, but it's Mill Street, University Courtyard, and Putnam Square. The remainder of the apartment complexes did not recycle. I also did a compost project at East Elementary, and East Elementary was chosen because their principal is very supportive of gardening and composting and interested in the solid waste issue. And they also had large recycling bins available that they had bought with a previous grant a few years ago. So for 2 months, I did composting with the school. I educated 10 classrooms, and then daily we would, for an hour, we would compost waste from the cafeteria. And we had a little procedure, and the children learned about the whole trash cycle, problems with solid waste and recycling, how they can do that. And then they also got to do some hands-on that they really enjoyed. And then we would gather the compost, we would weigh it out by the bin, and the kids would write it in a little notebook. So we diverted 320 pounds of compost. This program will continue this spring with Community Food Initiatives, who's been working on composting for some years. Jim has been working with them and Nancy. And I found this to be a good entree into the schools for diversion and solid waste discussion. So with this, I've found that the city has expanded its role in recycling education, and we've been interfacing with Ohio University, and I think that that's a really critical tool. The community assistant program right now is threatened because of the current budget cuts. Jim Hentz is leaving, so they're really wondering what's going to happen in that with that program. He is taking that program. It's really a model program. It's one of the few in the country. He's going to be doing a presentation at a conference, but he's taking it to the University of Connecticut. We've had an increase of recycling availability and education. We've had an increase of outreach to businesses. We've had city and public school collaboration on compost education and implementation in elementary school, and increased media coverage on solid waste and recycling. The data collection on solid waste methods and current problems, waste problems in Athens. We had the compost program at East Elementary. It was provided to students and faculty, and an outreach through different festivals. We also did a university off-campus orientation and outreach to various community organizations, the training of community assistants in the Office of Off-Campus Living regarding solid waste and recycling, and collaboration with Ohio University. My recommendations are that there is community involvement through a recycling board and an uptown recycling task force. I really found that we do not have a cycle of recycling in the town, and it really affects, I think, the continuity for citizens. And that is, there really is not much recycling in the uptown area. We do not have any bins or containers. A few businesses are doing it, but it's really because it's very important to them personally. It's not really been supported by city policy. We need education, recycling education that meets the transient population and the diversity of our community. We have a community that constantly changes with professors, faculty members, staff, and students, so we can't assume that these folks know how to recycle and what our rules are, our sorting rules. And again, we do have the best recycling, or not the best, but the longest curbside recycling program in the state of Ohio. So I think that that's very important. We could increase our access to recycling in the community, such as containers. We could also minimize sorting categories. Right now we have 9 categories. And most people, or many people, are overwhelmed by that. Other people really do a great job and they wrap them up like Christmas presents, but it really takes a commitment. We could expand collaboration with businesses. Solid waste ordinance could be enforced within the community, including recycling. Last year, a big talk was the enforcement of the landlord-tenant agreement. That seems to have just gone away for now, and I think we still have those many problems, and they could be addressed with the use of that agreement. And then coordinate with Ohio University in recycling and sustainability. They did hire a natural resource conservation coordinator. They're putting lots of energy into sustainability issues, and I think that that's something we could certainly piggyback on as a community. Any questions?
I just have a comment, and that is the concern over Jim Hintz leaving and the status of that whole program. And I know that the Community Relations Committee is very concerned about that in terms of the budget that's coming up very soon.
The OU budget?
The OU budget, yes. And concerned that the funding will be cut on a drastic level. So I suggest that perhaps you get in contact with Ray Hazlett or Dale Tamke concerning that, and possibly attend the meeting when they're talking about encouraging OU to refund that program, even though Jim is leaving. That might be a big help.
Jim?
I'm just following up on Carol's suggestion. I wonder if council might consider a resolution supporting the continuation of that office and particularly the program of community assistance. They were very valuable to us in a lot of ways last year. And it would be,
Use this as an example. Anything else in that resolution? All members of council?
definitely all members of council and.
Yeah.
I would want to include some whereases about, he came from the Civic Responsibility Task Force and earlier discussions about, ways to help, reduce tensions and, really educate folks as they're moving off campus about a lot of things, not just stuff like trash, but, a lot of the issues that we struggle with in this community. I think it's been very helpful.
It certainly exceeded expectations.
And that committee that task force came together after the really bad incidents that we had a few years ago at Halloween, where we were dealing with I think a crisis in relations.
And Jim and his assistants worked hard prior to Halloween.
Definitely.
And in many other cases. So we could come up with a lot of whereas.
Okay, Carol?
Okay.
Well, I'm just thinking that perhaps we could put in the whereas that, whereas
Take
Jim
notes.
Hentz began his relationship with the city and the university relationship as a student coming to council meetings and as the representative of Student Senate. And, what a great model for exactly what it is we need to continue that relationship.
Okay, so it sounds like we're putting a resolution together here.
Debbie's trying to figure out which whereas to take.
Give the whereases to Debbie there. And this is, okay, I know there's a new person taking over the community assistance. His name is Kevin Smith, I think. He's kind of in charge right now. I've talked to him a couple of times and trying to find out, really, I was trying to get information on where all the CAs are so we can intersperse them and find out what the neighborhood association is dealing with. The other thing is, if you remember from that audio conference, town gown audio conference that was there, is the idea of continuity and perseverance on this. So that's one thing we have to look at on both our side and the university side. Because they were 16 years in the making, I think.
Right, they
Right?
were.
Okay, so that's something we have to think
Got
about.
a few years to go.
Go ahead, Debbie.
I guess it would be appropriate to ask too, a lot of what you talked about in here is the need for ongoing enforcement in dealing with solid waste issues. Where are we on the litter control officer?
We have an offer out, but the person hasn't accepted yet.
Okay. And there's a couple other things I wanted to bring up. At one point, we discussed trying to get some covered recycling bins, but they got very pricey real quick. That was one of the discussions we had with Ray earlier in our meetings and the consultant meetings. And I know we've got those out there, but we still have more if somebody needs some to do that. And one of the actual discussions that occurred is if one requires more than one, they're welcome to get some, even though I wasn't for it myself. I was outvoted on that. But that's the idea, is if there's a need for recycling bins, they're available. The other thing to dovetail with is in terms of litter control. And I don't have the paperwork with me now, but if you remember sometime a few months ago, is the idea of putting the responsibility of litter 18 inches off the curb. This was brought across by Steve Pearson. The idea of making property owners responsible for the litter out into the curb. I brought that up with the idea that it wouldn't be feasible until we have a litter control officer in train. It sounds like we will have one, and I'll bring it up for the next committee meeting of mine, mostly with the idea it becomes a tool to use if need be. Again, I don't know how that would work. The only place I found is it's in New York City, which I don't think we really use as a model whenever possible, but
We'd have to grow a lot.
I think so.
Well, so this would be uptown, like uptown also in front of businesses, 18 inches into the street.
Wherever there's a curb, I imagine.
From the curb into the street.
Yes. That's
safe
what
at my house.
the Department of Sanitation is using for in New York City. And this is this is brought up from the Clean Committee and suggested by Steve Pearson, the Code Office, at
Okay.
those meetings a
Okay,
long time ago.
I have a question. Are cigarette butts considered litter?
I thought they were just votives of addiction.
Well, I know,
No,
but
they're
I mean, these,
litter.
all right, they're litter. Okay. Just wanted to make sure, because they're small. They're small
Okay, so-
litters.
yes, but they're toxic.
Okay, because there's a lot of them around,
Okay,
yes.
in terms of recycling, go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to say, just to let Lorraine go and do something she wants to do. I was wondering if we could summarize what you said as the student population, the population that comes and goes, generally has a pretty good background, wants to do it, but lacks information. Is that a fair summary of what you said? And it's not something you can hand them a piece of paper and say, go do it. I mean, we can ask them to sign a piece of paper, but fundamentally, it's an educational.
It is an
component.
educational piece, and I just heard from Kevin Smith today that if you just drop off the bins, it's not enough. He was really finding with the community assistants that they needed that follow-up and that piece of education. And it's been shown over and over that it's just a really important piece, education and outreach. And constantly having that as a forum for promoting cycling.
Virginia?
Well, now, it may be me, but sometimes when I'm looking for phone numbers, et cetera, of the city, it's sometimes hard to figure out which department is which. Sorry. So I wonder if, and I know obviously, maybe if we had a litter officer, maybe there could be a hotline or something. I mean, because I think nowadays people want every time, you don't pay attention to something until you need the information. And it might be 6 o'clock in the morning or something, or 11 o'clock, or 3 o'clock in the morning. And so that I think access to more information is something that could be useful. And accurate information. I have to say, once I called and I said, is it trash day today? And they assured me it was, and it wasn't, because it had been shifted because of the holidays. And so I think, even though they assured me that that was not the case. So I just think that, the city employees should make sure they're up to date on things, and maybe we want to have some kind of hotlines, like the trash hotline or recycle, to help people when they need the info.
Well, I'm aware that we do on the website have a list of the streets per day in
Right.
terms of in terms of garbage pickup.
Right. But that's different.
Yes, well, actually,
Because
that's
it
it.
changes.
I noticed there's a definite lack there that doesn't coordinate
Right.
with when the recycling is. I mean, basically, they're supposed to be the same day, but I don't think it says actually in there. I think one of the emphasis that we need to point out is that the recycling fee is on your bill already, but it's on your bill regardless of how much or little you recycle. So if you pile up your recycle bin, there's less garbage to take out. So these are the things to think about. I know that Jim Hintz and Mayor Abel put a DVD together at one point of recycling. Some students did that. I'm not sure whatever happened to that. It wasn't terribly professional, I know, but it was actually instructive.
Oh, come on, Paul, be positive, just for once.
Well, unfortunately, I saw it at the same time with the University of State's DVD. That one was, a whole different level, of course, but at the same time, I was trying to get the point across, and they were short vignettes of what to do with each thing. So it was actually almost content-based in terms of, okay, what do I do with this glass? What do I do with the paper?
Can we do streaming video on the web? I mean, it would be so nice to do that.
I think we lost that capability now.
We've done streaming video.
Yeah, to do,
With this new system.
That's right. Well, that's what we're looking forward to. So we
Million
can
hours
have,
later.
yeah, so we can have a little thing, recycling, have you done this, have you done that? Green bottles, no. White bottles, yes. I mean, make it cute, it can be cute.
And I know,
But people need it when they need it.
And I know Lorraine has at various events gone over with the recycling bins, and this is how you sort. Basically you have diameters or whatever they are, tribes, not tribes, but basically just a show of how to do these things. And that worked out pretty nicely, because people say, oh, this is how I pack it. You know, the paper's over here and the glass is over here. And again, it is educational, it has to go on all the time, because we have a new
Always a new population.
Yes, okay. Any other questions for Lorraine? Jim?
A comment for Lorraine. I just wanted to say thank you to Lorraine. I know she was hired to do a job, but I think she did a remarkable job. I saw her involved in a lot of these activities, and I've heard about her involvement in lots more. So we really appreciate your work and your suggestions. Thank you.
Must have worked too hard.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, thanks.
Okay, my next thing is cool cities. Essentially, last committee meeting we got together, when I was talking about this, was the idea of signing on to the cool city resolution. You may pass these around there.
I will.
I don't know if Rick got one or not. This was brought up with the idea of signing on and committing to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. I know that Ben of the Sierra Club and Lorraine both brought this to, discussed it with the mayor, has discussed it with the city staff, and with us at one point or another. So these partners here crafted one and put some together. We have a series of whereases, some relevant, some global in nature. Some of the commitments are in the last bottom whereas in the first page. Did you get one, Rick? You want one of these?
Yeah.
Okay. The idea there is that this is a commitment to try reducing our energy footprint as well as a greenhouse gas footprint. Here I am talking away from the mic, excuse me. I know it probably needs some tweaking, but at the same time, I'd like you to read it over and decide whether we want to put it in front as a resolution. I'll let them speak if they wish. Do you want to add some more to this, or?
I don't know if you guys want a minute to read through it before I start jabbering.
It's going to take more than a minute, so maybe I'll. Okay. Part of the thing of the commitment here, if you remember last time, is to sign on with a, I forget the acronym there.
The ICLEI?
Yes, and this is an organization that actually does evaluations of and benchmarking for energy use and energy greenhouse gas emissions in terms of energy. And the idea is to commit to a certain amount of reduction in it over time. If you look at the whereas, I tell them to take out all the Kyoto Treaty stuff, but the idea there is to reduce it over time, and most of it through efficient buildings. We've done some of this with the vegetable diesel truck, as you can see in the first whereas. We have LED lights. We have synchronized traffic lights, which cut down on this stuff. So we're getting there. You know, we've got a start on it. The question is, do we want to, commit to more? Again, I don't know how the mayor feels about it, but I got the feeling that he was into it as well as the staff was, because anything that can reduce energy costs is always a plus. And the sign-on to the ILECI, I should get this down right, it's a sliding base for that, depending on population of the cities, and we'd be running about 500 to 600 for our population size as well as our per capita income. That's how they do it.
Per year.
Is it per year? I think it is. But at the same time, what they would do is they'd give us a starting match, and we could start working our way down. They tell us where to go, and they have programs to run this through. Is that correct?
It is.
Introduce yourself.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ben Appleby. I live on 2nd Street, and I'm an executive member of the Appalachian Ohio Sierra Club. This resolution kind of came out of the U.S. Conference of Mayors resolution, which came from, the inability of the federal government and state governments to really do anything about global warming. It seems like such a huge international complex issue, but when we talk about solutions, what's going to make the biggest difference is right here. It's our personal actions and decisions, and it's the way that we run our community. Both, as the city government running its own operations and the way that we support what our community does. It's just like the recycling, things that Lorraine has been working on. This resolution, we took out a lot of the extra whereases to try to make it more specific to our community. But the things that it does is, first it says global warming is real. It's a problem. It's, time to quit bickering about that. It is real. And, second, we can do something about it. And that perhaps here at the community level is the best place to do something about it. Part of the Kyoto Agreement and the agreement that the U.S. Conference of Mayors has put together is to actually set some measurable goals so that we're not high-fiving each other over things that look good or feel good, but we're actually having ways to gauge our progress and set realistic and meaningful goals. So to do that, we did include a goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 10% below the 1990 levels in the next 10 years, which I think is a very reasonable goal and something that's going to be worthwhile and actually having an impact.
That's the first resolve on the second page, I think, right?
Yep, that's the first resolved. The second is having us join the ICLEI, that's the International Coalition for Local Environmental Initiatives. And they've been working with almost 300 other cities, municipalities across the United States. So they provide software that would help us make emissions baselines for 1990, as well as set our goals based on that. The software also helps us quantify, these energy saving things that we can say, all right, we're spending X amount of dollars to save X amount of dollars over the next, 5 years to 10 years, but how does that look when it comes to greenhouse pollution? And that their software allows us to say, all right, this is going to help us meet our goal, or this is something that looks good but is really less useful than other things. And they also can, put us in contact with other cities who have already gone through this. We're not reinventing the wheel, but we can work with other cities, like Keene, New Hampshire, who's a college town of 25,000 citizens, very similar to Athens, and they're a couple years ahead of us in this process. So we can do some benchmarking with comparable communities. The second to last section here, we wanted to include something that was real, make this more than just a resolution that's going to look good on paper and not really have any effect. And one thing that came to mind was creating and finishing a pedestrian and bicycle transportation plan for Athens that is in our comprehensive plan, but pretty much unfinished. And if you look in the comprehensive plan, it says the city really ought to put together a plan for bicycle pedestrian traffic, and so far that's not been done. We've certainly done a lot of good things to promote that, and I think we need to continue, but to have a plan and some intention in place would be a great way to reduce traffic downtown, save gas money, the students are paying, make our community safer. It's I think a win-win situation all around. The last section here, we also wanted to do something about the housing stock of our community, and the fact that we have a lot of older buildings that are less efficient, but we didn't want to, we couldn't come up with any solutions, just brainstorming in a couple hours. And we know that's a very complex task, but just realizing that it's going to take some innovative thinking and really working with all the stakeholders to find some solutions that are appropriate to doing something about energy use in the older buildings.
Part of that last whereas is that there are programs to insulate houses for low income, and but mostly geared for residents. I know with the CHIS program strategy there was a program in there for landlords for improvement of houses, but it was really cumbersome, and I think the last time it was put out there, it really wasn't taken up, so it wasn't included, as far as I know, in the latest CHIS, because it's just not something that's workable. Mostly because the match was low and the bookwork was excessive, I think, at the time. On the other hand, there are other programs that we could probably latch into eventually, and that's one of the easy ones because of our housing stock is, everything can be improved in terms of windows and insulation. Again, the last whereas is basically giving us some ideas of all the different things we might be able to do. It doesn't mean we do all of them, just like the rec plans, community recreation plan. It has a wish list of things where we can pick and choose to get that goal. Again, part of the assumption is that having met, Ben and Lorraine, having met with the staff of the city and the mayor, that they feel it's doable and that city council feels it's something we want to do as well. Because if you don't have everybody buying into it, it's not going to happen. I've seen that happen before where, you can get sabotaged at the low level and the high level. Questions, comments? Carol?
Just while we're looking at things that should be required changes to the code, we certainly could immediately add some green requirements to the development plans.
Yeah.
I would definitely support that. I think, these new, especially these large, planned unit developments have such a legacy because they're going to last for a long time, and we're now at the point where we can make those decisions before they're built as to, what kind of electricity rates or, bills the students are going to have 5 years from now and 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think the developers, as we saw, are in a rush to get this built, and maybe not as concerned with other things. I don't think right now the Sierra Club is in support of any more regulations on the landlords or rental community. It seems like the only time they ever get together is when there's some more regulations proposed, and then they get together to oppose them. And we'd like to try working with them first to see if there's any workable solutions before we come to you and ask for more regulations or laws.
But we did talk about that as far as the civic responsibility or the task force that's been looking at landlord issues. And if you, as a student, are aware that you're going to a landlord who has created this highly efficient apartment that's going to cost considerably less to live in, and that's a more responsible landlord in other capacities, that puts a pressure on the market for others to follow suit. So, it could be just a very open market way of encouraging energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would like to just note that Mayor Coleman did sign this 2 weeks ago. So there are now 11 cities in Ohio.
I went on their Cool Cities website, and Akron, South Euclid, North Olmsted, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland Heights, Brooklyn, Garfield Heights, Dayton, Toledo. These are some of the cities that signed on. Go ahead, Virginia.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful idea. I have one question, and I think I may have asked it last time when you presented. I believe there's some software or something, and then some analysis that has to take place. And the question was, and who's going to do that?
The Sierra Club is definitely ready to do some volunteer work when it comes to data collection. I don't know if we could commit 100%, to say without knowing, be able to quantify it into, say, terms of hours. But we know that it's going to take some work, and you guys are busy, and I know that the city's generally understaffed and overworked.
Right.
But we think this is something that's worth doing, worth the Sierra Club making a commitment to, and certainly worth the city making a commitment to.
To handle all the computer analysis.
Yeah, and that's a lot of we don't need a PhD in math, hopefully, to do that. That's part of the program. So it's more a matter of data collection as far as, what was our population in 1990? What's our current population?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what actually has to take place, but if you're willing to do that, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Carol?
Your laundry list of cool cities in Ohio doesn't seem to have any small cities in it, so we could be the model and lead the way in that respect.
Actually, I was recently talking to Jimmy Stewart, and he indicated that the little city of Belpre had done energy audits of all its city buildings. He had just been to a mayor's meeting. So I think that the model is out there, and certainly, and we've really heard interest at the county level that they would like this to be at the county level with their comprehensive plan.
And really part of the thing is to reduce the energy costs for the city, but the idea there is it's always tied into the coal that's being burned to generate electricity. It's part of the discussion about the landlord stuff is because we were discussing that we have 70+% of the housing stock, which is aged, is landlord, and therefore that's the easiest, that's the biggest wedge to look at in terms of getting housing improvements and everything. Debbie?
I like this in general, but is this the time to do little tweaks and wording things?
Yes.
Okay. Number 8,
Okay.
I think you want sustainably produced biofuels, not sustainability.
Okay, yeah.
And in the third, resolved, this plan will both satisfy the comprehensive plan. I don't think the comprehensive plan makes a request. So if we could drop the apostrophe S in the request.
Yeah, I was thinking, can we maybe get this to you or to Debbie, kind of read it?
Yes.
I'd rather read it a little carefully if we're going to.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I want it all how you guys want to do it. And you have to look and say, we put this together. And I know I'm not a composition worker. And
Right.
Those
so-
are just 2 little things that I saw. So
Yes.
there may be more.
This probably is. Yes, go
May I
ahead.
ask if
Virginia?
it would be appropriate to maybe give the Sierra Club a copy of this
Yes.
Peddling to a Safer Community, which was a plan that the students put together in promoting more biking and more attention to bike safety. So,
That would be
because
great.
I noticed that was an important part of this. And so maybe you'd like a copy, and maybe you can use some of the ideas or integrate it into your pedestrian and bicycle transportation task force. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I don't have to put this up at the next meeting if you don't want, but can we fix it by the next meeting? Do you think so? Or is everybody on
Sure.
board with that?
Sure. I mean, if there are any little typos or something, we'll just
Okay.
send them to you.
Okay,
Yeah,
send them to
yeah.
Debbie. I'll send you an electronic copy so you can cut and paste. Okay.
Okay.
So we'll probably try putting this up for the next reading. Rick, how do you feel? Is this something that you think we should sign on to? I know you're aware of it, and I know your staff is really the component, one of the components of this.
Right, I think what it does is it sets some general parameters that as a matter of policy, i.e. council is seeking. What I and Ben have talked about is I wanted to set something very similar to this in the tasks, that we could have a couple of departments sign up. It's just like, because we keep doing it, it's like we're putting in now more of the 5-minute walk signs. Well, we're then taking the LEDs out of that and putting them in another. I mean, you know, so it's not that we're not doing things, we are. It's just that I'd like to set down goals so that the department head signs off of it on that. And, you know, I'm not saying that that's a performance objective goal necessarily, but it's, if you don't have the commitment from the department head to do it, it's just going to sit there. And I don't want something that just sits there. You've got to have concrete to it.
Well, yeah, again, we're not, you know, as city council members, we don't do the concrete stuff in that sense.
Right.
And I remember a couple of years, we had this discussion last night about, when doing the resolution in terms of save energy for electric pumps and stuff like that. And I seem to recall, at least 10 years ago, you changed all electrical system in the water well fields to
Yeah.
improve efficiency.
Right, we did.
And that's not in a whereas, because I forget the vague, you know, actual nuts and bolts of it, but I know this is something that's ongoing
Right, we
all the
spent
time.
about $150,000 to change them out and get them more energy efficient.
Yeah.
But that, probably, the systems are better now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so these things are ongoing, and as I say, for the day-to-day stuff, that's, you know, and department-wise, that's your bailiwick in that sense.
Right.
Okay.
No, but I think it's establishing the goals. I think I think you need, you know, go through it and fine tune it, but
Okay.
Yeah.
applaud you for doing it.
So it's citizens and government,
It's everybody.
everybody.
It's
yeah.
got to be everybody.
Right.
I certainly respect, you know, Mayor Abel's wanting to have some systems in place to make this more than just words and paper. Unfortunately, there are a couple other cities in Ohio that have, you know, signed on because it sounded like a great idea, and they're kind of sad. And, you know, nothing's ever going to be made of it. But there is also kind of this chicken and egg thing with the ICLEI, because, you know, you're only invited to join the organization once, you know, the leadership in the community has, you know, publicly stated that global warming is a problem and we can do something about it. And then, you know, once we have their assistance, then we can find ways to say, you know, if we are going to have new ideas for, at the department levels, and, make some tweaks here and there as to what, daily running of the city, what is really effective and what's not. And they can say, hey, here's some other communities about your size, similar demographics, and here's what's worked for them. So it kind of saves us having to, reinvent the wheel in some ways.
Sure.
Okay, and really that brings up another thing, is that if we're looking at the sign-on fee, it's $600, do we need to encumber that? That's a small amount of money. And is that something that you can do, or should we put it in?
Just put it in the council budget, that's okay with me.
How's our budget
Do we
look? I
have
haven't looked at it lately. I guess we can. Okay. So that'll work. Okay. So we can play around with the wording on this and then put it up for next, and I assume it's a one reading resolution.
I don't know, because that third whereas is a commitment.
Oh, okay, you mean a resolve one? Okay, so maybe it's three reading, okay. Can you check with Gary on that? Okay. Okay. have
The
that going.
10%.
Paul, I
Yes.
have a miscellaneous item for your committee.
Okay, miscellaneous, go for it.
I was at a meeting on Friday where there was a fairly extensive discussion regarding the class action lawsuit against paint companies for remediation of lead paint contaminated homes. And the firm that's handling the class action is the same one that won the tobacco settlement. And there's a deadline coming up within the next few weeks for cities that want to sign on to the class action and be part of the class, so that if they win, the paint companies will actually have to address the cost of lead paint remediation, which includes replacing windows and doorways and dealing with those issues. I can get some more detailed information about how we do that if people are interested in it, but I think we have to move fairly quickly if we're interested. I didn't realize this deadline was pending, and it was up in the air for a little while because the legislature actually tried to immunize paint companies from this kind of litigation during the lame duck session, and our representative voted to immunize paint companies during the lame duck session.
Okay.
But Ted Strickland vetoed that piece of legislation, so the class action is going forward. If I can get whatever documentation we need to be able to do that, are people interested?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, if we're going to recoup some
Just talked about aging housing stock, which is where
Right.
lead paint
resides, yeah, you're right, yeah.
Right.
Say nothing of other places in the city system, too.
So I don't know if, I mean, that's probably something that would need an ordinance, and you think a resolution?
I don't know, maybe.
We'll
But
find
we'll
out.
probably
That's what
have to
used do,
suspend if we.
resolution, right? Yeah,
A resolution?
yeah.
Okay, one reading or three? So Debbie will
Okay,
check
it's
on
three.
whether it's one or three, and we may need to suspend.
Okay, so I think we should do that. Anything that, sounds like a
Can
good
help
idea.
pay to remove a hazard. It's really pretty shocking, the amount of exposure, because there was a period of time where the lead paint was actually chips of paint, and kids had to eat them to get the contamination, but now the paint is deteriorating so much that it's dust in the air, and it's far easier for children to actually get the lead contamination from the paint. So if there's a way that we can help get some funding to do lead paint remediation in the city, I think it would be a really good thing to do.
Okay, that's a good idea. What say you committee members? All right.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, so look into it, see if we need to get a resolution there, and suspend it as well, I guess. Anything else in miscellaneous Environment Committee? No? Carol, it's yours.
I will be. I just need to come back to you yet again concerning the art market and to ask how council thinks would be, what council thinks the best way to deal with this is. We are reinventing the wheel once again. And last year I talked to you a little bit when we moved to East State Street that we were thinking about a Saturday situation? Well, we've met, the people who have organized the art market have met a few times, and what we're feeling at this point is that we would like to go down to 5 markets instead of 9.
Okay.
That the September one, we would like to coordinate with the business folks, the students that are putting together the business fair on September 8th. And we would also like to coordinate with the Chamber of Commerce on the holiday tree lighting date again this year. We did that last year, which just leaves 3 dates, May, July, and October, which would be the first Saturday in those months on the East State Street for the street closing. So one of the ways I can do this is to put all of that in an ordinance just for this year, date it this year, so I come back once a year with what they are doing. So we do the street closings that way. I will not ask for the street closing for the business fair or the holiday evening. Those things will come with other ordinances, the organizations, when they come forward. But to me, that's the easiest way to do it, which really means a substitution ordinance that just replaces the prior ordinance but makes it on a 1-year basis. The other possibility, and I had talked a little bit with the mayor, is we could leave it the way it is, and according to the ordinance, the mayor and the service safety director could make changes as they see fit, which was sort of my initial question, but then when I started looking at it, it's so different from what we originally started in '03. This is our 4th year. And so it seems to me that perhaps the yearly ordinance describing what the plan was for that given year might be the most efficient way. Any thoughts? Who's on my committee anyway? Amy and Jim?
No, I think that it makes sense to develop an ordinance that just has a framework that you can insert each year into.
So keep the permanent one, but make it much broader so that we can adapt to all of these. I can do that. I've looked over the ordinance and really it's pretty, except that it states exact times and the street, we can make it much more adaptable and do it that way and have a permanent ordinance that allows for this market.
Either way, for me, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
No.
It's fine.
Ladies, any thoughts? Okay. I'll just choose one, and you'll see it next Monday. And I have no miscellaneous, so, see, I took 3 minutes.
You're to be commended.
It's the kind of committee meeting we like.
It's up before 9:30.
Okay.